So today is a beautiful day. You're going to hear some birds chirping, maybe a woodpecker going. And the contrast that you're going to see, the surroundings compared to the story I'm going to tell you today is going to be very stark. As the story I'm going to tell you about is very serious, and it's going to be long form too. So it's going to be probably the longest video I've done yet, and I'm going to go into the crime, but also the history of the guy who did the murder. So put your feet up, maybe get your favorite snack, and get ready to listen to a very interesting but disturbing story. So if you came here for a Korean War veteran, a quarter, a yellow bone-handled pocket knife, a drunken murder, and throw in transporting a dead body, well, you came to the right place. So let's get right to it. Like today, it was a spring day in Brooklyn, and the date was May 18, 1957, and William Surgener, the subject of this video, had been drinking with various cronies all day long, and at 9 p.m. he met a man named Cheyenne in a pool room. Cheyenne invited him to a party, and on their way to the party, he offered William a drink from a pint wine bottle, which he concealed in his pocket. William drank half of it in the hallway, and Cheyenne drank the other half. Now, the party itself was at 309 Lexington Avenue, and the party was in full swing on the third floor when they arrived at 10 p.m. At the party, William was dancing and carrying on, and Cheyenne was buying glasses of whiskey and cans of beer for himself and William. Cheyenne was a nice guy, and he treated William to 5 cans of beer at 35 cents a can and 3 shorties of whiskey at $1.25 per drink. And these were bought from the hostess in the kitchen. Now, William said that he went to the front of the apartment and he danced with a girl who he didn't know. Meanwhile, Cheyenne remained in the kitchen. At around 11 p.m., Cheyenne came to the front room where William was dancing, and he told him that he was about 25 cents short for the purchase of some Thunderbird wine, which some of the viewers would be very familiar with. William told him not to worry about it and that he would get the quarter. William had a pretty vague plan to go home and ask his mother for the 25 cents. Now, William was 20 years old at the time, and I kind of wonder if it occurred to him how odd it would be that a grown man would have to get a quarter from his hard-working mother. And there's going to be more on her later. And the reason he had to do that was because he was drunk as a skunk. Now, as William was figuring out how he was going to get a quarter, he saw a man named James Moore leave the front room where he was drinking and dancing. Now, William hadn't noticed James before this moment, since the party was very crowded and well-attended. So he followed James into a lighted hallway, and he asked him, "Mister, could you please lend me a quarter?" Now, William's plan was to borrow the quarter and pay him back later. But James had another idea, and he replied with, "I don't give young punks quarters." Now, according to William, he turned his back on James to return back to the party, when all of a sudden, for some reason, James punched him on the neck, and William fell against the hallway wall. James allegedly hit him again across the back of his neck, and William fell down to one knee at this point. And it was then that William put his hand in his right-hand pocket, took out a yellow bone-handled pocket knife, opened the 4-inch blade, and stood up. James supposedly took another swing at him, and William promptly stabbed him, straight at chest level. James Moore fell down without a sound. He was dead instantly. The time, 11:30 p.m. William took out a handkerchief, wiped the knife down, and returned to the party. Now, Cheyenne actually saw him putting his knife back, and he asked him what happened. Truthfully and ominously, James said simply, "I just stabbed a man." James and Cheyenne went into the hallway, where Cheyenne stooped over the dead body and felt for a non-existent pulse. "He's dead," he told William. Cheyenne wanted to get rid of the body, and William explained his idea to get him out of the hallway and leave him anywhere but the building where the party was still being held. Cheyenne came up with his own suggestion of wrapping the body up. So, while William stayed with the body, he went downstairs and returned with a blanket. Now, nobody came into the hallway to see the morbid scene of William hanging out with the dead body of James Moore. So both Cheyenne and William rolled the deceased into the blanket. Now, at first, William said that he and Cheyenne should carry the deceased out into the street. But Cheyenne considered James was way too drunk to be reliable in transporting the body. So Cheyenne, helpful new friend that he was, went back into the party and came out with a guy by the name of Bill, a man who was unknown to William. So the three of them transported the body outside of 309 Lexington Avenue, Cheyenne at the front of the body, Bill holding the torso, and William, the killer, carrying the feet. The three of them carried the body down the street and dropped it in front of 323 Lexington Avenue and left him there at about midnight. William left after Cheyenne told him that he would take care of disposing the blanket. For having just recently met, Cheyenne was remarkably helpful with William, considering the circumstances. So William departed the scene with Bill and Cheyenne with the body on the sidewalk. And it was at about 12:15 a.m. when an identified person informed a patrolman on radio motor patrol of a drunk lying in front of 323 Lexington Avenue. Of course, we know the case. It wasn't a drunk. At 12:35 a.m., Detective Roberts arrived at the scene where a large, curious crowd had gathered around the body of James Moore. Some of the people who were excitedly milling about. The body was lying on a steel split cellar door, and there were stains under the body, blood stains. So let's take a moment, shall we, to talk about the victim, James Moore. And this is what I was able to find out about him. James Moore was 31 years old. He was married, and he was an honorably discharged veteran of the Korean War. In 1951, he came to New York City with his fiancée Inez and married her that same year. He was a factory worker, and he earned $50 a week. His wife had many miscarriages due to a condition of the womb which required her to see a doctor frequently. Because the treatments were so expensive, James's wife Inez worked periodically as a domestic or serving woman. They had no children in their marriage. James's wife, Inez, and niece indicated that James was a moderate drinker, and Detective Roberts inquired among James's friends and neighbors, and he said that he found out that James was not a troublesome person. Inez said their marriage was harmonious, and that for the past 4 years, they lived in a furnished room on Marcy Avenue, and they paid $14 a week in rent. They seemed to just be living a regular life despite her issue with her womb. Inez said that on the night of the tragedy, she had to leave the furnished room to work as a serving woman for a lawyer. At 7 p.m. on May 18, 1957, James kindly walked Inez to the bus stop so she could reach her destination. And that was the very last time they would ever see each other again. Now, Detective Roberts said that on May 19, 1957, the police went through every building on Lexington Avenue, but they were unable to locate any bloodstains or find anyone who witnessed the transportation of the body. In the period between the discovery of the body and the apprehension of William, which is to come, the police questioned about 150 people for information. Finally, after receiving confidential information, and I don't know what that information was, he found out that Cheyenne and William were the culprits. So, Detective Roberts entered William's home, which was 442 Green Avenue, and it was about 12 noon, May 31, 1957. And he spied, that's the word that was actually used, spied. He spied William sitting and watching television with a can of beer near him. William was babysitting, taking care of his sister's 14-month-old child who was lying down contentedly sucking on a bottle of milk. According to the detective, when he advised the defendant about the homicide, the defendant almost fainted at the news. Detective Roberts said that the defendant seemed almost relieved. By the way, the report is written, it almost sounds like the detective entered the home without announcing who he was, almost like he snuck in. William readily admitted to stabbing James Moore, but because he admitted his guilt so quickly, the detective was a little suspicious, so he questioned him repeatedly. After going over William's version of the story 5 times, the detective was finally convinced that William really was the killer. Moreover, Detective Roberts took William to 309 Lexington Avenue, where the party was, and although William led the police to the 4th floor instead of to the 3rd floor, where the party was, he later stated that he was confused. He confirmed that he went to the 3rd floor where the party was, And he described the apartment, and he even described the view from the apartment prior to have entered it with the police. Now, Mrs. Fuller, she was the occupant of the apartment, and I think she was the hostess. When she was confronted with William, she denied knowing him, she denied having had a party that night, and denied any knowledge of a homicide. Now, that part I can understand, but denying the party. Anyhow, William reenacted what occurred in the hallway, and he took the police on the route which he, Cheyenne, and Bill took to transport the body. Now, at the time of William's apprehension, he did not have the knife used in the homicide on his body. However, he told the police that he concealed it in his shirt pocket in his home. So, the police went to his home, and they picked up the knife. More evidence that he indeed was the killer. The police described the knife as a regular, bone-handled pocket knife with a 3.5-inch long blade, 1.5 inches wide. William was arrested on May 31, 1957, after having made a full admission of his part in the homicide. Now, as a result of his account in which he implicated Cheyenne as the one who helped transport the deceased body, Cheyenne was arrested. However, he denied any knowledge of the homicide, he denied ever being present at the party, and he denied transporting the dead body. Williams said that he started drinking with his cronies from 10 a.m. on the day of the murder until about the time of the stabbing at 11:30 p.m. Now, that's a full day of drinking. He said that he started drinking 1 pint of scotch and whiskey at 10 a.m., and that's what started the whole thing. Williams said that he and the others later chipped in and bought from a liquor store a pint of Thunderbird wine, and by 8 o'clock in the evening, he was drunk. Williams said that 1 month prior to the murder, he found the knife that he used to kill James Moore in Tompkins Avenue Park, just lying on the concrete. He said that after the murder, he saw Cheyenne with a girlfriend, but he did not speak to him. Furthermore, he said that from May 19, 1957 to May 31, when he was arrested, he didn't tell anyone what happened. In fact, he stated that he blocked the crime out of his mind. He explained that it seems that it just didn't bother me. He said that all next week and the week following the murder, he resumed his pattern of babysitting during the daytime and drinking at nighttime with his friends. He remarked that even since he has been in jail, that he still wasn't bothered by the crime. He said that he doesn't know why this is so. Not only that, but Williams said that when the police came to his house, when they arrested him on May 31, he had forgotten all about the homicide. He said that at the time he committed the murder, he was drunk and messed up. Well, I'll say. He said that he had begun carrying knives at about the same time he started drinking heavily, which he estimated was about 1951. Williams said that everybody that he knew carried a knife, and that carrying a knife made him feel important. He only went to house parties when he was very intoxicated. And if he wasn't drunk that May 18, he wouldn't have gone to the party, and James Moore would literally still be alive. Now, in regard to the stabbing murder of James, he said, I know I'm going to get time. You can't cry over spilt milk. Now, the victim of the wife, Inez, who we had mentioned earlier in this video, said she never knew William, and from what information she gathered about the circumstances of her husband's death, she felt there was no reason for his murder, and she recommended that the court give William the maximum punishment for his crime. Now, Inez and her niece said that James was never arrested either in New York City or in North Carolina, which is where he was originally from. She said she received $1,000 from the Union Insurance Company through her husband's job, and that she used this money to pay for his burial in Orange County, North Carolina. But she sure could have used the money just to survive. You see, her family had no personal savings, and she was not in good health, which we already touched on before, but she was just told that she needed an operation for a tumor in her womb. Now, she had been doing domestic work for about 3 days a week, earning $7 a day to make ends meet. But things for Inez were not easy. Now, the arresting officer, remember, that's Detective Roberts, he felt that the eagerness of William to admit to the crime was motivated by a desire to hide the fact that he and others may have been involved in attempting to rob James Moore, and in the course of the robbery, they committed the murder. Now, he believed that William was smart enough, shrewd enough to hide behind self-defense rather than indicate that the homicide was committed in the course of a possible felony, which makes the situation much more serious. Now, let's take a pause for a moment and take a look at William's personal history, including that of his parents. Now, this is not going to excuse his actions, but it's going to inform his background. When William was 14 years old, a detective from the 79th Precinct filed a delinquency charge against him because James and a 12-year-old had a .32 caliber Smith & Wesson revolver in their possession on January 18 at PS 129 in school, which is located at 640 Quincy Street in Brooklyn. He had taken the revolver from his home, where it had been brought by a lover of his mother's who had been living with them since November 1950. William brought the revolver to school to show it off to all his playmates, at which point the 12-year-old stole it from him. Now, William had quite a few run-ins with the law, and I'm not going to share all of them, but there is one more that I want to go into right now. On September 25, 1955, William was arrested for disorderly conduct. The complainant was Harrison Humphrey, who was the manager of a restaurant at 631 Franklin Avenue. He said that at 3:50 a.m. on September 25, William entered the place of business and interfered with the customers inside and prevented them from leaving. William should have been asleep in bed, but here he was. So William comes behind the counter and he threatens Harrison with a knife. Suddenly pulls the knife out, at which point Harrison asked him to leave the restaurant. However, William went after him with a knife, so Harrison, in self-defense, picked up a barbecue iron roll and struck William over the head, for which he was hospitalized in Kings County, suffering from lacerations of the scalp. He got 32 stitches for his head wound, along with a suspended sentence. William has asked why he would do such a thing, and he said that he was drunk and that he couldn't understand why he suddenly pulled out a knife and threatened people with it. It seems like it might have been a convenient excuse for him. William's family life wasn't exactly an oasis of peace. His father worked as a tenant farmer until one day he just walked out of the house saying he was going to the store to get something, and he never returned. William was 4 years old when that happened. William's mother tried to trace her husband to the St. Louis area, but to no avail. She had described her husband, William's dad, as a steady worker, which is good, but he was a heavy drinker. You kind of wonder he's passing that off to his son. Her husband was unreliable in supporting the family. I guess that's no surprise coming from a person who walked out on his family inexplicably. It's probably a Captain Obvious moment, but let's stop for a moment and just talk about how difficult it was for young William and his mother, with the man of the house abandoning him and his wife. We hear stories like this all the time, and we know that suffering is part of the human experience, but that doesn't make it any easier. William's mother, Carrie Mae, she was born in 1921 in Jacksonville, Florida. She was the youngest of 17 children. When she was 2 months old, she was brought by her mother, so that's William's grandmother, to Wilmington, North Carolina. A month later, her mother died of cancer, and William's mother was raised by Lewis and Hannah Murphy, who were friends of the family. Now, her father had already died when she was 6 months old as a result of falling into a fire while he was drunk. So Carrie Mae, William's mom, said she didn't know what had become of her 16 siblings, which is an absolutely astounding statement to make. She didn't know where any of them went. William's mother said that she was raised when she was 14 years old by the Murphys, but she was unhappy in this home because they constantly called her a bastard, gave her leftovers for food, and made her feel rejected and unwanted. She completed the 8th grade in school when she was 14 years old, and it was then that she decided that she wanted to escape from her very unhappy home life, so she married William's father. But as we know, this didn't help matters either, because her husband deserted the family when William was only 4 years old. So William's mom worked on farms picking beans and cucumbers and lettuce, and occasionally she brought William and his siblings with her while she worked. However, Carrie Mae got tired of the farm work, and she read in a newspaper about a sleep-in job that was available in New York City. So she decided to come to New York City on January 1, 1946, and she left her children in Wilmington, North Carolina, and she would send $30 a month for their support. In April 1948, after 2 years, Carrie Mae came back to Wilmington, North Carolina, and brought William and his 2 siblings to New York City to live with her in a 2-room unfurnished apartment at 94 Reed Avenue in Brooklyn. William's mother denied having any arrest or record. She was in good health except for what she suffered from nerves for many years. In fact, she said she was nervous and anxious all her life. From January 21, 1946 to 1957, William's mother worked almost continuously either as a domestic or as a factory worker. She was a hard-working, long-suffering mother. Now, William's life was difficult, just like his mother's. When his father deserted the family when he was 4 years old, he was cared for by a non-relative man in his early 50s who died. Now, if William was close to him, it didn't say if he was, but if he was close to him, that must have been devastating to lose his father and then this man. Now, he was 12 years old when he was brought to New York City, and it must have been a very daunting move to the big city from the countryside. William developed a drinking habit, and although he was able to get jobs, he quit his most recent job in 1956 because it was difficult for him to get up in the morning after a night of drinking. From October 1956 to February 1957, William was completely unemployed. So his mother arranged for him to care for his sister's child while she, his mother, went to work 5 days during the week. In return for caring for the child, William's mother gave him $1 or so of spending money every week, and she gave him food and shelter. On Saturdays and Sundays, he didn't have to babysit. Now, according to his mother, he was reasonably conscientious in the care of his 14-month-old nephew, which is obviously a good thing. Now, this babysitting arrangement obviously wasn't conventional. William should have been out working in a factory or somewhere. I know it was noted that when he was younger, William was inadequately supervised by his mother, who had to work during the day. She didn't really have a whole lot of options with no husband to help her. So the area that they lived in, let's talk about that. That was Bedford-Stuyvesant, and it was known for its teenage gangs, especially in the area that William lived. And of course, he made some contact with those teenage gangs, which we're going to talk about in a minute. But let's take a real quick recap of William's life up to this point. He was raised in a family with a father who deserted them when he was 4. Then his mother separated from him when he was 10 in order to improve her living conditions in New York City, which is good, but he doesn't get to see his mother. He was the oldest of 3 children, and he was raised under difficult economic circumstances by strangers in a farming community before he came to New York City at the age of 12. When he arrived in the city in 1948, he was subjected from moving from one home to another, and he wasn't supervised properly by his mother because she had to go to work. So it's no shock to me, or probably to you listening to this, that William was emotionally and physically deprived, and he had a great need for feeling that he belonged somewhere. And you can probably see where this is going. Now, the aggressive teenage youngsters of Bedford-Stuyvesant area had a greater appeal to William than his home, where his mother wasn't even present because she was working so hard. Though the youth squad did not know or show that William was affiliated with any gang, William admitted that he was actually a member of the El Tico gang in 1955, and they hung around Classen Avenue and Bergen Street. He said that from January 1955 to April 1955, he was a member of this gang, and in fact, in February 1955, he participated in a gang fight against the opposing Gaylords on Dean and Classen Avenues. And he proudly stated that there were only 6 members of the El Ticos against 25 Gaylords. Those are quite the odds. William admitted that he associated with boys of his own age who drank as he did and who carried knives. He also stated that many of his former friends were serving time because of possession and use of drugs. It was 1953 that he began to drink particularly heavily. He also began to associate with friends in the vicinity of a bar and grill on Bergen Street and Washington Avenue. His motive in life was simply to drink. He drank whiskey, wine, and beer, but he avoided gin because it got him drunk too fast. William became loud, boisterous, and violent under the influence of alcohol, once even attempting to jump through a window while intoxicated, but he was restrained by his friends. It sounds like he might have been a mean drunk. He didn't use drugs because he couldn't even handle a doctor injecting him with a needle. However, he smoked reefers, marijuana, on an irregular basis since 1956. William admitted that in 1952 or 1953, he began to carry knives, and he did this because he saw other people do it, and he felt that he would not be important if he didn't carry them. William had no insight as to why he became an excessive drinker, and he also offered up the information that he reached a point where he became shaky, and he needed to drink constantly in order to bolster himself up. I'm doing more talking than usual. One more drink. Pardon me. So that's William's personal history. He was charged with first-degree manslaughter, and the outcome was guilty of second-degree manslaughter, which often happened as a lesser charge. He was sent to Elmira Reception Center, where he received a 5 to 10-year sentence. That's basically William's story. I don't know what happened to him after this. And it's very sad because alcohol didn't just destroy William's life, but obviously it destroyed James's life, the guy he murdered, James's wife, Inez, who has tumor in her womb, and probably James's niece, who probably loved him. And then also think about William's mother, long-suffering lady. I mean, she should be supported by an adult son as she goes into her sunset years, and obviously that wouldn't happen. So it's a very sad story in the end, as many of these are. I am very curious to know, what did you think of the story? Was it interesting to you? And if you made it this far, I want to give you an extra thanks because it's my longest video yet. And I really appreciate you being here to share in my passion for these stories from the 40s and the 50s. And I'm looking forward to the next video, and I will see you on the next video.